Hello and welcome everybody to the AGL Road to 3 Million webinar by Blackbook.ai. We'll just give people a couple of minutes to join, and we'll join at start at 1:47. Just a quick note that all participants will be muted during the session, and this session will be recorded. We've also disabled the chat functionality to allow all of the questions to go through the Q&A function of Zoom. So if you have a question, please pop it in the Q&A, and we'll leave some time at the end of the session to have Nish answer any questions that you may have for him, any questions that you may have for myself, or any questions that you may have for Blackbook.ai. It looks like the majority of people have now joined, so we might get underway. First of all, I just wanted to say welcome. This is the first webinar in a series of customer spotlight webinars that Blackbook.ai are hosting. And really what we're aiming to do here is to spotlight the success that some of our Blackbook customers have had in automation, in RPA, and even to a certain extent within the AI agenda, uncover their approach and how they've cut through the hype that sometimes comes with automation and the benefits that they can get from automation, and showcase real world scenarios where our customers have delivered sustainable results through their automation programs and really started to push into automation at scale. The aim of the series is really to showcase those journeys and the learnings from Blackbook's customers, and that will allow you guys to accelerate those journeys and those learnings of your own. I know that we've got customers that are just starting out building their first bots, and we've got customers that are building their 100th bot, their 200th bot, and really saving hundreds of thousands of hours a year, as well as starting to discover all of the benefits beyond dollars that come from automation. So just to quickly cover what we'll be going through in this webinar. So I've obviously already covered the welcome and a little bit on the series. We're going to dive straight into it with Nish from AGL and chat about their journey in their road to 3 million. And I'll go into a little bit more what we mean by the road to 3 million in just a moment. But Nish will give us about 10 minutes of his story, 10 minutes of their journey, and then I'll dive into a fireside chat, some really juicy questions that when we were preparing for this, I really didn't know the answers to. I really hadn't heard, despite being on this journey with AGL for a number of years, I hadn't heard all of the ins and outs and some of the great stuff that they're doing. So really it's been as much of a learning for us at Blackbook as it will be for you guys on the webinar. We'll leave some time at the end for a Q&A as well. So as I said before, pop your questions in the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end. Now, we're not here to listen to me. We're here to listen to Nish's story. We're here to listen to AGL's story. So I'll dive right in. AGL are one of our most successful customers at Blackbook.ai, using UiPath in their automation journey. And really, I don't think that AGL, and I certainly don't think that Nish needs too much of an introduction. He's very active in the RPA community. He's very open, and AGL are very open about their story and the journey that they've taken. And really what we're aiming to do here is showcase that, because a lot of our customers ask Nish for his advice and ask for Nish's story, and we're able to make this available to our broader community and our broader customer base. So Nish has been working in robotics and RPA for the last 4 years, and really that makes him a veteran in the scheme of RPA. I know you've certainly been in it longer than I have. And I guess most recently, Nish has been taking AGL on their automation journey for the last 2 years. With that, they've managed to achieve real growth and scale in their automation program, building out a co-source team between 2 partners and their internal AGL staff of nearly 20 developers, business analysts, and support staff. Most recently though, AGL have absolutely smashed an audacious goal of hitting 3 million automated transactions per year. And this was months before their target. It takes them to a total of 4.6 million transactions completed successfully since embarking on their automation journey. And this happens across 140 processes, which is really a large scale implementation of UiPath across their back-end operations. So sales, fulfillment, credit, payment, billing, and more. Those are the components that really make an energy retailer tick and really have an impact within the organization. Now, most recently, we're working with Nish and the AGL team to enhance their processes through integration with AI capabilities such as NLP, OCR, and other machine learning technologies to achieve things that were not previously possible. This allows them to provide exhaustive coverage of the end-to-end automation of a process. So you no longer have those partial automations that require a human in the loop necessarily. We're able to automate the entirety of a process. That's enough from me. I'll now hand over to Nish and talk us through AGL's journey. But I think beforehand, and this is certainly a question that I had, Nish, can you tell us what exactly is a transaction for AGL and what really makes that so important? Why was that such a pivotal point of AGL success?
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me, guys. Really pleased to be and pleasure to be here. I think just probably to talk a bit about what transaction is. Essentially, I think if I were to give you like a very simple example of a transaction, it would be the steps that you would be, required to take, let's say for creation of a billing account in your system, or maybe creation of a request that has been submitted by a customer, fulfilling that request through all the steps it would come through. So normally, let's say you would get a request through a mailbox or through a digital channel of any kind, picking that up using a bot, from the mailbox itself, logging into all the applications that it needs to, performing all the checks and validation, and completing that successfully is what we are defining as one transaction. And I think from the example that I've given, I think it's probably clear why that has a significant importance. I think that's of significance because it's something that enables us to seamlessly cover the entire process without any human intervention. And the more processes we try and target to really do that, the better coverage that we have with regards to consistency, reduced errors that you would typically expect from any RPA or automated process. So that's just a bit about transaction. Ryan, can you go to the next slide just for the journey? So with AGL's journey, like Ryan mentioned, we have been on this journey for about 2 years and 2 months now. Really started with like all the other organizations, with selection of tool. We did a few POCs, at the end of which we landed up on UiPath. Had the infrastructure setup done. I joined AGL, and really my goal initially was to just define a governance framework to manage the end-to-end delivery, right from identifying processes till the actual implementation and reporting after that. So that was primarily the goal. Once we had a baseline framework ready, we kicked off delivery by identifying some of the smaller processes to start with. So we had really simple or medium complex processes to begin with that we identified, where we wanted to understand what's possible and how are we actually really going about implementations. There might be things that we don't expect to happen, might happen. How do we really understand that, and how do we really learn from it? So that's where we sort of kicked off the delivery, I think in April or March, early March, and the first sort of process went live early April around that time. So I think from that time onwards, transaction has been something that we have been really targeting or tracking. And like I said, because it's so relevant and important in a process, that it gives us the ability to really seamlessly go through the entire process. That one transaction itself is, reducing a lot of efforts that someone would have to, invest in manually. And since then, we have continued our delivery. We've got a team now of about 20 people. We've got two partners. So Blackbook is one of our partners, and the other partner who has an offshore presence is TCS. So we are working with both of them. And I've got my own team as well. So I've got BS and support analysts in the team who look after, the opportunity identification, error management, and exception management sort of activities. So that's where we have been in terms of the overall journey so far across the last 2 years. On the slide, you can see the progression of the transactions that we have got. So like Rand mentioned, as of today, we have completed about 4.6 million transactions in the last sort of 2 years, 2 months. Last year, financially, we had a target of, FY19, we had a target of 1 million transactions, and we missed that by, I think, about 60,000 transactions. And then from there on, the target for financial year FY20 was 3 million transactions. And I was really happy. The team, the efforts that they took really got us to that target just in April. I think early April or end of March is when we got there. And we're continuing to deliver. Like I said, 4.6 is where we currently stand. Now, those 4.6 million successful transactions have occurred across 140 odd processes. These processes operate in sales fulfillment, billing, credit payments, mostly the business operation side of things. One important factor there is that with the ongoing situation, even prior to that, there were a few critical processes that were identified. So out of those 4.6 million transactions, there's about 1.5 million transactions that are solely related to those business critical processes. Now, why I think that's important is that because there's one part of it, which is the labor component or the manual work component. But these transactions have a value beyond just that, because they're so critical to the organization and to where we get to. So that's one part of that transaction bucket that was very important for us. Interesting fact is that in those 4.6 million transactions, we haven't actually counted another 1.4 million transactions because they were considered a part of a tactical solution. So really, if you look at it, our overall count of transactions is 4.6 plus 1.4. So that's where we stand in terms of the transaction count. Those 1.4 million transactions were essentially a tactical solution, like I said, for an initiative which was business critical, and we in a way helped them deliver that on time, and it's still being done in some ways. Now, I've been mentioning that all these counts are successfully completed transactions. Obviously, not 100% transactions that we have obviously performed were successful. The 4.6 million transactions that we are talking about, they are successful in the total of about 5.6 million transactions. Sorry, 5.4 million transactions. So you can see the average sort of successful transaction rate that we've got is about 85%, and which is really good. I think what we have done is essentially try to make sure that when we are trying to have the coverage of the process identified or trying to gather information about a particular process, we capture as many scenarios as possible and really target the high volume scenarios where we can cover and deliver more business value than the rest of them. There's in any process, there would be multiple scenarios. So the goal is never to automate all the scenarios that exist in the process. The goal is always to really target the sort of higher value and high volume processes and scenarios. And that's how we have been able to really get to this number overall. And trust me, I think you may not believe this, but in FY19, when the transaction goal was 1 million, the focus was never actually to get 1 million, in my personal opinion. And that was never something that I like tried very hard for. The goal was always building the capability and the trust within the organization, where people start learning and really trusting the capability and technology, so that we build on that in the following years. So that's in a gist, the snapshot of where AGL has been. Maybe just an overview of some of those business critical transactions. One of them has been, there've been a lot of activities that were triggered because of COVID-19, the lockdown, and the availability of people to really perform those processes. So there's been quite a lot of value that we have been able to really extract out of some of those tactical or even long-term solutions now that we delivered during that time, and that's continuing to deliver value for us. That's pretty much from the journey perspective, Ryan.
Awesome, Nish. So you mentioned there, and I suppose I've got some questions. I was listening attentively there, and you mentioned, and I don't want to dive into COVID in too much detail, because I think everyone's tired of it. Everyone's sick of hearing about it, but it is a great story. And you mentioned that you were able to deliver some great results through that COVID period and remain nimble and responsive. What enabled that, I suppose? Like, you've got such a huge scale, 140 processes automated. Obviously, there's a large operational piece there. And when you think about the governance side of things, at that kind of scale, things can become very rigid. What enabled you to be so nimble and responsive in, I suppose, reacting to COVID-19 and being able to very quickly spin up automations and robots to handle that additional load and that additional crisis?
Well, I think firstly, AGL is, it's been really the transition that we have gone through as a part of this whole situation. It was really effortless because AGL has always promoted flexibility in terms of working. So there was not really a delay when it came to us being able to work from home or moving to a different location. So that's been one really big positive to start with. And even the offshore partner that we had, which was TCS, they also scaled up very quickly when, because like I said, I've got some of the team members offshore as well. So even they were able to scale up very quickly and respond in amazing turnaround time to get to a place where we were able and ready to look at any problem statements that were coming our way. And I think, like I said, in FY19, which was primarily the first year of when we went about, delivering processes, the goal was not to really get to the 1 million transactions in a way. Obviously, there will always be a target, but I really wanted to take that time to build the trust within all these teams that we currently have these 140 odd processes in, really building that trust and capability, understanding within all the teams. So what essentially happened as a part of that is, because people had started trusting the technology and the capability and the delivery as well, we started getting these requests from the teams themselves, because they were able to connect to what we could deliver, what we could automate, and then we would get requests around, we've got this process that needs to be done for so and so reasons. So would you be able to help us? And really the focus at that time was supporting critical pieces in within operations, and that's essentially what we tried to do.
Awesome. You took the next question out of my mouth. So I was really going to try and dive into, I suppose, why was that transaction target important? What was the conversation around automation that enables you to discover processes? But it sounds like there isn't really a process for scientific discovery of processes. It sounds like what you've done is really establish such a cultural impact and so much trust in your team that the processes just come to you, and people want to work with automation, and that's amazing, and that's really different to what a lot of our customers see.
Yeah, I mean, I think one aspect of it has always been us identifying processes on our own. But I think even if we do that today, the trust that we have within all the operations team is, if someone in my team approaches them with a certain process and go, we want to automate this, can you help us understand this process more? They're never like, no, we can't automate this. It's more that attitude change, and that has happened over a period of time. Like, we never wanted to scale the delivery to a point where we had 30 processes in 3 months. That was never something that we started with in FY19. That was never the goal. We wanted it to be gradual. We wanted it to be, in terms of providing coverage, it was more around getting to that level where, although we may not have built very high value processes or highly impactful processes, are the processes that we're building providing the right level of understanding to anybody who's starting to look at this as an option now.
Amazing. Now, everyone always talks about, I suppose, their COE or their center of excellence, and I don't necessarily like the concept of a center of excellence myself, and
I'm with you there.
I think that puts the responsibility on a select few people, right? But obviously there are certain pieces that a center of excellence really is pivotal to enabling in an automation journey that are, I suppose, around automation. How did you scale all those pieces around automation? So not necessarily the technology themselves, and not necessarily scaling up on automating additional processes, but obviously there's a lot of dependencies for automation around the applications that you interact with, the infrastructure that you interact with, the amount of change management from a technical perspective, and the real threat of creating technical debt, but also the change management from a human perspective. So how did you go about scaling those components that weren't necessarily related to RPA and the tool that you chose?
I think I've been working, like you mentioned, I've been working on in this space for quite some time now. So my experience with my previous organizations has always been a guiding factor as well when we were trying to make these decisions, which were not tool specific, which were not technology specific. How do we go about them? So all of that sort of what's covered as a part of the governance framework that we defined, where really we try to make sure that every step of the way, that while we're going through the entire delivery, there are enough checks and balances in place to really make sure there's enough coverage, there's enough understanding before we move to the next level. Now, I'm not saying that that's been always perfect, but I think what has been important is that we've always tried to keep it little bit flexible as well. So if there are processes for which we don't have work instruction, for example, how do we go about that? If there are processes for which we have work instructions and we just want to validate, how do we go about that scenario? There might be situations where, an entirely new thing is being thought of, where there's absolutely no visibility of what the process is going to look like. And the focus there becomes, okay, we know that this is the outcome that's required. How do we really go about that scenario as well? So there's been really a mix of things that came our way, and what we tried to do was, as a part of that governance, really have some level of flexibility that enabled us to do that.
And would you say it sounds like the easiest way to learn there, and what's made you successful is just to dive in and start?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think from that perspective, having people around you who really understand that process from an end-to-end perspective really helps. And that's been one of the biggest factors, that people who were involved with the developers, with the BAs in the team, essentially knew what the process was all about. So we always sort of relied on the process knowledge of things on those process SMEs or owners, whereas the execution of everything post automation relied on my team. So that's pretty much how we have gone about roles and responsibilities as well. and that's where it's helped us.
Awesome. And you mentioned as well that you have an interesting
Sorry.
resourcing model, a co-sourced resourcing model with multiple partners. So you've got your AGL team, you've got obviously some of our team from Blackbook there as well in the development space, and a team of developers from TCS. So how was that model pivotal to the impact that you had, to the success, and how does that work? Why has that made your automation program so successful?
I think it is all really, to be honest with you, it all boils down to everyone, be it Blackbook, TCS, or AGL, was really focused on getting the right level of success in the program. Even if we were delivering one process a month, I think it was also all about really getting that nailed down. And I think that's where it became a really healthy competition, where if there was one success delivered by Blackbook, we had another success story from TCS, and there was always these key wins that we would be able to showcase or talk about, and that really kept it healthy, and it still is that way. And I think the focus then becomes not really are we doing better than the other person, but really what we are delivering, is it really delivering that value or driving that value?
Amazing. And I know some of the guys there are certainly very, very early in their careers, and from the Blackbook side, and very, I suppose, goal driven. So I'm sure that healthy competition has really helped
absolutely.
to give them something to work towards.
Yeah, and look, I think I'm talking about all the things that we have done well. It's essentially something that we share with the partners. Essentially, if we really didn't have the level of support or the kind of capability, we would probably not be here where we are right now. So I think it's also credit to them to really be putting, credit to you for putting in those efforts in terms of getting us here.
Awesome. Now, one last question, I think, before we dive into some of the Q&A from the customers. And I think for some of our smaller customers, they're probably waiting to hear about sort of where you started and what's different now. So what's the biggest difference now, or the biggest change between where you started and maybe the smaller scale of what you had back then and what you've got now? And if there was sort of one learning for somebody that's new in the journey, or an organization that's new in the journey, what would that be?
I think the biggest change is that probably my team doesn't have to go and dig out processes anymore themselves. We get requested or approached to really look at feasibility assessments for processes that somebody else who's completely not related to my team has identified. We get those processes assessed. We go back with what sort of coverage it is going to provide through automation, whether it's really the right thing to do, because even a lot of scenarios that we've been in, just because you can automate it may not be always the best of solutions. It might always be something that you could still leave manual for n different reasons, or there could be a very different way to deliver that process, not just through RPA. So I think all those aspects really help. Whereas in the beginning, it was obviously up to the team, up to me, up to all the partners to really look at processes, find those processes, then really convince somebody to really try that out, what the automation will look like, demonstrate that, get that validated, get that trust, and then really try and go into production. Whereas now, like I said, it's completely different. So most of the process feasibility analysis, at least the first level of it, it's completed by the team itself. And I think that's where that transaction logic still holds so well, because right from an analyst to a GM or a CEO for that matter, they will always be able to relate to what that transaction is, because that's essentially enabling you to go from point A to point B. And as long as they see that commonality in terms of, um, how we would be able to measure this performance or benefit, that essentially translates really well across the whole organization.
Perfect. Look, the questions are flowing in. So we might jump into, I suppose, some of the Q&A from people that are on the call, if you don't mind. So there's a couple of simple ones and there's a couple of juicy ones as well. So first of all, Nish, how many bots are being utilized for those 4.5 million transactions?
So I think round about for those 140 odd processes, there's about, I think, 50 bots that we've got, which we are really utilizing throughout 24/7 to schedule those processes. Now, not all those processes are daily or weekly. Some of them might be monthly, some of them might be hourly, some of them might be weekly as well. So it's a mix of those things. So scheduling plays a really important role there.
Yeah, that must be tough.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have to do it, so it's up to everybody else. But it's more around those principles that we try and really look at from a scheduling perspective. We probably know what the average volume is going to be like for a given process, then really allocating that time to schedule the next one on the same license and so on. So it's more around just some common principles that we would follow while scheduling and that's pretty much how we try to utilize keep that balance.
Yeah, I know that scheduling piece can be hard. I used to manage about 200 processes, and it's certainly a full-time job, and I think it's something that people often don't understand when they get into automation and RPA. Whilst there's a huge benefit from it, there is a large amount of sort of expertise and knowledge that you build along the journey as you start to scale up to be able to manage something of that scale. And the same way that you'd be managing 200 employees or 140 employees for yourself, really it warrants the same amount of resources to make sure that you get success there. So the other question that we've got here is, how has the journey affected the teams in which the bots were rolled out? I.e., were they threatened by the bots about losing jobs? And that's from Amanda Scrimshaw.
Yeah, so I think, like I said, transaction is something that really resonates with everyone within the organization. So I think it's more important to really show them why this is being done in terms of what is it in it for them. So essentially, are they really able to concentrate on some value add activities while we are working through this? This has been the biggest, I think, sort of a plus on while we are doing things. Fear of automation is not something that I think is purely coming into play because of RPA. I think there's always been, through every industrial revolution that we've seen that before computers, for example, people thought computers will do everything for us, only to realize later that computers were enabling them to do something more. And I think automation, in my personal view, it's pretty much the same. And that's essentially what I've been always speaking about. It's never been about someone losing their job or someone not being able to do something. This has always been something that sort of supplements the employee and sort of complements the employee, and it not really take things away from them.
Perfect. A lot of organizations take a cost out focus to automation. It seems AGL very much considered the benefits beyond the dollars. I think that's words straight out of your mouth. Nish, what is the proudest moment from a human impact perspective in AGL's journey?
I think this current situation probably is the proudest moment, because the fact that my team on the ground was still able to work through everything throughout this whole time with minimal interruptions. And bear in mind, there was a cyclone in India, as a part of which my offshore team was impacted, and there was some issues with how they dealt with it, and I think it's been really very proud. I've felt really proud to see that transition and really focus on still getting things right. Obviously, there's been, a lot of challenges that have happened, that they have faced, and that we currently in this situation are facing. So even throughout this whole time that we have been impacted or are working through this time, the fact that the team has been able to really consistently, build processes, make an impact through picking up things that have had a really critical aspect to it from a business perspective, and deliver them or nail them has been the best so far. So I think this whole current situation would classify to be the proudest moment.
Perfect. Amazing. One from Derek at UiPath. What are the main applications involved in the 140 processes that you've automated?
So we've got SAP, Outlook, database, all in all those mainly. I think because we've still got a lot of web applications that that are used across energy industry, that are used across quite a few such organizations. So web application is probably the biggest one. Outside of that, Microsoft applications and SAP is probably where we've been trying to use that. There have been integrations that we've tried to do with with things like database as well, or HANA and things like that. So it's also been those applications. But again, I think it's not something that's unique to AGL. I think the range of applications is probably similar across all the organizations. Maybe they will have a different kind of CRM or a different kind of billing system, but I think it's more or less the same sort of application lineup.
Yeah. And how long did it take for the AGL workforce to change and start delivering processes for assessment to your team? This is from Stephen McCurry.
Like I said, I think the initial sort of maybe a couple of quarters is where we did the handholding in terms of at least specifics around what works, what is possible, what is not possible, and really building that understanding more and more is, I think, where we really try to focus our energies on. Because in my previous roles and through all the things that I've seen happening across other organizations as well, one thing that I definitely wanted to avoid was aim for 40 processes in the first 3 months. That was never the goal. And essentially, really, even from a tool perspective, UiPath, when we started, was also a relatively, competent tool even then, but it was still a tool that was becoming what it is today. So even understanding what the tool helps you with and how reliable it is, I think even that took, we had to take some time for it. And that's essentially what we tried to do while we were educating the users across the group.
Amazing. Now we're starting to come towards our time, so I might put forward just one or two last questions. So are the bots used only internally, or are they customer facing as well? If so, how you are measuring the effect on your customer experience?
I'm not 100% sure whether there's a the chatbot side of things is not something that my team is involved in. So that part of customer facing is not considered, or it's out of scope. But outside of that, I think there's quite a few processes where things like emails being sent out and SMSs and interactions with customers like that have always been happening. We didn't really consider or give a very different focus in any sense. I would say it's been always a part of the benefit assessment or the process assessment, where we've had to look at what are the factors that are going to influence this process, or what are the outcomes that are going to be influencing this process. So customer experience has obviously been one of them, but I think it was also about getting the process itself right. if we got the process right, then obviously the customer facing impact or the experience side of things would be automatically taken care of. So it was not always to be, dreadful about, oh, this is a customer facing process, so I need to do something different. I think from a overall lens, all the processes, had to be looked at in a similar manner. I think the customer facing aspect probably puts a bit of a, light back on the automation aspect, and then whether it's doing the right thing or not. And I think as long as we have enough checks and balances and validations in the process, I think whether it is even internal users, our customers for that matter. So if there's an agent who's relying on the bot to really work and give the required output to be able to go back to the customer, even that has a very indirect customer impact. So I think it was always about getting that process right, and then looking at it from an overall experience perspective rather than just specifically customer experience perspective.
Yeah, awesome. And one last question. Would you say that RPA is a good stepping stone into more advanced technologies such as NLP, machine learning, NLG, and are you embarking on that now? And I think we covered this off in my introduction a little bit.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people thought that RPA is probably the end of everything, but that it isn't. It's probably just the starting or the journey into business process management. I think this is pretty much one of the primary building blocks, in my opinion. The kind of coverage RPA gives you is more around simpler things, repetitive things, where there's not a lot of intelligence involved. We've tried to integrate at AGL really the natural language processing elements, machine learning elements to sort of try and provide coverage. We have tried to explore that, and so far we've seen really good outcomes through it as well. But again, I think we need to. I would advise that when you're looking at RPA, when the kind of journey that we went through to build trust with RPA, I think we'll sort of try and want to go through a similar journey with AI as well. While there's enough trust and understanding of the capability, I think building that trust and capability with the other teams is also equally important. So we'll try and follow a very similar journey with integrations as well, one step at a time.
Perfect. I think that's a good idea. I think the AI ML side of things, people are still a little bit scared of. They become comfortable with RPA and automation, but I think they're scared of running rogue a little bit, which isn't a reality at all, not at the moment anyway.
Yeah.
Look, we might wrap it up there. We're nearly at time, and I just wanted to give some closing comments. So first of all, thank you, Nish, and also thank you everybody for joining. I know it's tough at the moment to take time out of your day, and everybody's on webinars all day and online meetings all day. So it's quite often easier to take some time away from your PC around lunchtime. So yeah, really, really thank you. And Nish, thank you for sharing your journey. And I think I've learned so much through the process of preparing for this webinar as well as today. And I hope that everybody online has as well. I wanted to add one last thing that I suppose if anybody has any information, anybody wants any more information, I'm an open book. So I didn't introduce myself at the start, and I'm sorry, but I'm Blackbook's head of automation, and I look after the customer success and customer enablement of all of our new customers and our larger deployments, but always open to giving advice to anybody that's on this journey, that's looking for learnings, and we're able to connect you to the customers that have already been on this journey, that have already had great success. So my details are published within the slide deck here, and also the details of our office are there as well. So we've got offices in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, but wherever you're from, always willing to have a conversation and always willing to crack some of your toughest problems, as Nish has certainly given us some very tough ones to crack. So again, thank you everybody, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having me again.